Hey everyone, I'm Allison Morris. You are watching NBC News Now. It is decision day for Johnson & Johnson, and the CDC has decided, saying Americans can get the vaccine again. We'll have the details on who qualifies. At the White House, President Biden eyeing new tax hikes to pay for his American Families Plan. Who could get hit with a higher bill?
What I can say is that it will only affect people making more than $1 million a year. That's 0.3% of taxpayers.
South Carolina Senator Tim Scott will deliver the Republican rebuttal to President Biden's joint address to Congress next week. We've got a preview. All right, the J&J vaccine is the big news of the day, so let's get right to NBC News correspondent Heidi Prisbilla in Washington, D.C. Heidi, tell us about the CDC's decision.
Right, Allison, it was a CDC advisory panel that discussed a few different options about how to put Johnson & Johnson back on the market, if at all. And they chose the most liberal option here, recommending Johnson & Johnson without any restrictions for all Americans age 18 and over. Allison, really, the debate today watching this panel was over whether to put a restriction on there or a warning label for women under the age of 50. That is the control group in which we saw this rare blood clotting condition, Allison. But in the end, the condition was so exceedingly rare. The numbers that they gave were 7 in every 1 million doses given out, that they decided that the risks of having this vaccine not available or having it rejected by some women, particularly in underserved areas, that those outweighed the actual risks of this blood clotting condition. Now, there were some dissenters. This was not a unanimous vote. It was 10 in favor, 4 opposed, and 1 abstained. And we did hear a couple of the experts on the panel afterwards say that they voted in favor of this, but they did have concerns that they wanted to make sure that the awareness is still out there for women in these age groups, and that their awareness is out there for doctors about how to treat this rare blood clotting condition, given that it should not be used, or that heparin, which is usually the frontline drug used to treat most blood clots, should not be used. And so ultimately, this could be back out on the shelves within days, if not hours. Allison, there is still a more formal process that needs to take place, which is that the FDA and CDC need to officially make this happen. But that is really just a matter of time. The CDC director, Rochelle Walensky, has already said that once this is done, once this is recommended, they're going to move pretty quickly.
Yeah, Heidi, I was going to ask what we know about sort of the process going forward. Do they need to have any more meetings? Do the FDA and CDC need to get together? Or is it more of a, we just look this over, we sign off, and this shot can get back out there?
Again, it's unclear exactly how quickly it will happen, Allison, but we are expecting it to happen most likely at the latest by early next week. And the question really is, number one, what happened with vaccine confidence in the interim, given that this was so publicized, given that this pause went on for a week and a half, whether there's going to be any kind of problem reintroducing this to the public, and what states are going to do with the doses. They were initially planning to put these Johnson & Johnson vaccine doses out onto, for instance, mobile units to go into underserved areas, to go and try and vaccinate the homeless. That most likely is still going to be the approach. And the initial polls show that this pause did not overall dent confidence in vaccines. However, when it comes to this particular vaccine, the jury is still out on how the public is going to receive it. And that's why you heard a number of those members, even ones who voted in favor of this, saying, yeah, we don't want to take this vaccine away from anyone, particularly in underserved areas, but we do want the awareness out there. For instance, women in a certain subcategories, maybe they want to get their platelets checked out before they get this particular vaccine. We'll see how practical that is in real life.
Yeah, Heidi, let's talk about that a little bit more, if you don't mind. I know you've been covering vaccine hesitancy for quite some time now. What are the concerns, and how prepared are health officials if they start rolling out the J&J vaccine and people say, no thanks? Is that really a potential problem that they're worried about?
We are entering the hardest part of this vaccination campaign, Allison. A lot of the people who wanted the vaccine have gotten the vaccine. So now we're heading into this new frontier of vaccine skeptical, vaccine resistant, or people who just don't think they need the vaccine. Those are three very different categories. And so you're going to have different approaches. I've spoken with state officials, and they say, for instance, with the folks in rural areas, and we know this because we can break it down by the polling, it's more conservative, evangelical, white men. What they're hoping is with them that they will go through their primary care providers, through their doctor's offices, because they are trusted community emissaries, people that they would believe if they tell them you need to take this vaccine. For instance, with the African-American community, it would be doctors as well, but also local faith groups, community-based organizations. And then when you're talking about young people who just think maybe they're invincible and they don't need to take it, guess what? Colleges are talking about making it mandatory. Not all of the colleges, but let's say you're coming back to school, you didn't get your vaccine. Well, isn't it convenient that we have this one-dose shot right here in hand? So please just give us your arm and you can come back to school in the fall.
Yeah, a lot of practical uses where the J&J shot could really come in handy. I know a lot of people would have been upset if this vaccine did not come back in use. Heidi, thanks so much for all of your reporting today. We really appreciate it. Let's bring in former acting CDC director, Dr. Richard Besser. He's also the president and CEO of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, which was started by one of the founders of Johnson & Johnson. And man, Dr. Besser, am I glad to have you here on a day like this. I'd just like to get your reaction to the CDC advisory panel's decision. Anyone 18 and over can start getting the J&J vaccine again. Your thoughts?
Well, first, I think it was a really important thing that they took a pause. To look at the data, to try and figure out, was there a connection between the vaccine and these rare type of very severe clots? And what they found was, yes, there is a connection, but it is extremely rare. There were not a lot of occurrences of this that had not been detected. And so given that information, the question was, well, does this rare risk outweigh the benefits of having this vaccine, which has been shown to be safe and effective? And as we were just hearing, it has a lot of uses because it's a one and done. And so I was pleased that they've ended the pause, that they're resuming. But one thing that's important to note is that the FDA warning materials and the materials for individuals will need to contain information about this rare risk because people need to be able to make an informed decision. And while one person may say, a 1 in a million risk or 1 in 200,000 risk is small, someone else may say, yeah, it's small, but I have a choice and I want to go with a different vaccine. So, I think it's almost miraculous that we've got any vaccines against a new infectious agent this quickly. And the fact that we've got 3 means there's options for people.
Yeah, it is so important that we keep that in mind. What a miracle it is that we have not only a vaccine against COVID so quickly, but that we've got choices, right? Would you have liked, Dr. Besser, to see a more specific warning label here, some sort of restriction? Are you concerned that people may not have all the information they need as readily available to make the best choice for them?
Yeah, so it's going to be important that the materials people receive have information so they can make that choice. I was listening to the deliberations this afternoon and the vote, and the question was whether to say that it was recommended, but that women younger than 50 were at increased risk and might choose another vaccine. The concern was that just putting that one line there might lead to some women not having access to this vaccine and to overplaying the risk. And so the goal is to have more specific language that spells out what the risk truly is, so that people, in particular women here, can make a decision whether this is a risk they're concerned about or one that is in line with risks that they experience, every single day.
Dr. Besser, if a patient of yours came to you and wasn't sure what to do in this situation, I know it would depend on who they are, how old they are, what their situation is, but how would you kind of guide someone through the different things they should be thinking about if they are still considering the J&J shot but aren't sure how to decide whether it's right for them?
Yeah, it's an individual choice. One of the things that's clear is that, states and locals will need to make choice available to people. And it may be done that, certain days are one vaccine and certain days are another vaccine. I might try and help a patient put this into perspective with other risks that they experience. Every medication that we take, whether it's, a simple aspirin or a medication for high blood pressure, has some degree of risk. And the risk here is extremely small. But when it comes to something like this, when it comes to risk, often it's not your head that's driving it in terms of a calculation. It's your heart. And what I would say to someone is, look, if this is something you're not comfortable with, I wouldn't recommend it as a vaccine if I didn't think it was safe and effective. But if you're not comfortable with this, you do have choices. And I would try because right now we're at this point where the people who are really, really eager to get vaccinated, the majority have gotten vaccinated. And we need to meet people where they are with their concerns, listen to them respectfully, and do what we can to give people the information so that they're not deciding, well, this is just too complicated, I don't want to get vaccinated at all, because that would be the most dangerous choice. The risk of that, outweighs the risk from this vaccine by, thousands. And so that's something I would stress is like, whatever you decide, please make the decision to get vaccinated, because it will help protect you, your family, your community, and all the children who don't have access to any vaccines right now.
Let's talk about the stage that we're in with vaccines. White House senior COVID advisor Andy Slavitt was kind of talking about a new phase we're in where people have less urgency about getting vaccinated. Here he is.
We are working with doctors to encourage their patients to get vaccinated, and we're working with states to get primary care providers vaccine doses so more Americans can get vaccinated at their doctor's office the same way they are accustomed to getting other vaccinations. You will also see us focusing on other ways to make it as easy as possible for Americans to get a shot, including encouraging walk-up availability at pharmacies and other vaccination sites, and providing transportation options for those who need them.
Dr. Besser, as you've been saying, it is still so important that people get vaccinated. You wrote an op-ed this week. The title of that op-ed, "To Defeat COVID-19, Remember the Children, Don't Let Your Guard Down." Could you tell us more about your piece and what you are concerned about in particular here, especially when it comes to our kids?
Yeah. I think that what really concerns me is that I'm seeing many states declare victory, that this is over, and it's not over. Thankfully, we're entering a phase where there's enough vaccine for everyone in America who is 16 and older to get vaccinated. But that means that everyone 15 and younger doesn't have that yet. And if we declare victory, and we stop wearing masks when we're supposed to, and we stop social distancing where we're supposed to, then children remain at risk. And people who have immune conditions where the vaccines aren't effective or they can't get them, they remain at risk. And why would we want to do that? Why would we even though the risk of hospitalization and death for children is lower? There have been hundreds of children who've died. There have been thousands who've developed this unusual multi-system inflammatory condition. We can prevent many of these cases. So why wouldn't we want to do that? And the way to do that is to get vaccinated, follow the recommendations of public health, recognize that as the weather's getting warmer, we're going to be able to do more things and feel more free and liberated, but that this is not over and we need to protect the children and everybody else who remains at risk.
Do it for the kids. Dr. Besser, there's perhaps no better argument than that. Thank you so much. I know I said it at the start, but goodness, it's wonderful to have you with us on such an important day as this. We always appreciate you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
New Yorkers hoping to make COVID ancient history. The American Museum of Natural History, the latest vaccination site to open its doors in the city. MSNBC anchor Lindsay Reiser is there with more.
Allison, it doesn't get more iconic than the Museum of Natural History, especially that 94-foot-long blue whale model in the Marine Life Hall. And now starting today, people are getting vaccinated underneath that whale. Also new today, it's open to walk-ins. That's for all city-run sites now for New York adults. They can just walk in without an appointment. And you know what? This whale was a big draw back in 1969 when it was first erected. And the demand today has not waned. You know, they're trying to fill up about 1,000 appointments a day while they're open here. And this is coming as the trajectory is pretty positive for New York City. Right now, nearly half of all New York City residents have gotten that first shot. Cases, hospitalizations, and deaths are going down, but they really want to keep the attention up, the excitement up. That's why they made this announcement. So I want to have you listen to the New York City mayor and what he said about this venture today.
This is historic by every measure. We've never had a crisis like this, but we've also never had amazing solutions like this. We've never had things like this where people created something we couldn't have imagined in our lives. And it's exciting because it's just that incredible New York spirit. No matter what's thrown at us, we're going to find a way to fight back. And we're going to find out a way to do something smart and creative and exciting and vibrant.
This is also coming on the heels of the governor announcing that museum attendance can be expanded starting next week from 25% to 50% capacity. And I spoke with a woman after she got her first shot today. This is what she told me.
Was walking in the park on Monday and two girls came up to me and they asked me, do you want to take the vaccine? I said, sure. And so here I am.
What was it like being underneath the blue whale and getting your shot?
Surreal, because I have been in this museum so many times. I never thought I would take a vaccine right here.
And Allison, if you want more incentive here, they are giving out up to 4 free general admission tickets to anyone who gets their vaccine here. So at this point, they are really trying to encourage everybody to get that shot.
The Biden administration has no plans to introduce vaccine passports on the federal level, but private companies are going ahead and creating passport apps. So when could you actually be required to show proof of vaccination? NBC News Now correspondent Isa Gutierrez takes a look.
Vaccine passports create a different class of citizens.
We're not doing vaccine passports in Florida.
That is why I issued an executive order that prohibits government-mandated vaccine passports in Texas.
A handful of Republican governors are banning vaccine passports. Their argument, requiring proof of your vaccine violates your privacy and personal freedoms. But does the rhetoric match the reality? Vaccine passports are this notion you'll need a credential verifying you're protected against COVID-19. It's become an increasingly hot topic as more and more Americans get vaccinated.
Should we have to prove we've received our shots?
And it could determine who can travel, stay at a hotel, or even visit a bar.
But here's the thing. There are no plans for a mass rollout of passports, at least on the federal level.
The government is not now, nor will we be supporting a system that requires Americans to carry a credential.
As of now, New York offers the closest thing to a vaccine passport. It's called the Excelsior Pass, an app confirming your vaccine or a negative COVID test. But it's completely voluntary. For example, while Madison Square Garden accepts the Excelsior Pass, it's merely one of several options to show you're not sick with the virus.
The hope, of course, is that will help businesses attract more customers, and it can help open the city and the state up that much quicker.
So when exactly would you even need a vaccine passport? Like MSG, it appears most stadiums, theaters, and other major venues asks for proof of vaccine or proof of a negative COVID test, one or the other. As for schools, several colleges are requiring the shot, but there's still no centralized process to prove your immunization status. Besides, mandatory vaccines are nothing new. Every single state has laws requiring elementary school students to take a number of shots, with limited exceptions. That brings us to travel. While some independent apps are trying to help airlines and cruises streamline their health screenings, they just aren't widely implemented within the U.S. But outside the country is a slightly different story. In Israel, those who are fully vaccinated or recovered from the virus can get a green pass, allowing access to gyms, hotels, and theaters. The EU is also working on a similar certificate that can verify vaccinations, immunity, or a negative COVID test. Regardless of these new initiatives, the idea of a vaccine passport still isn't new. In fact, some countries still require travelers to carry a carte jaune, a yellow card created by the World Health Organization showing you've been vaccinated for things like yellow fever or other viruses, depending on the country you're traveling to. However, when it comes to COVID, the World Health Organization is not on board with vaccine cards.
We're not certain that at this stage that the vaccine prevents transmission, and there are all those other questions, apart from the question of discrimination against people who are not able to have the vaccine for one reason or another.
Bottom line, a universal vaccine passport for COVID-19 simply doesn't exist right now. And while it's possible more businesses or states could unveil their own apps, the idea you'll need a federally mandated vaccine passport to see a Broadway show or NBA game doesn't seem likely anytime soon.
All right, let's check in with NBC News Now correspondent Simone Boyce. She's got the latest headlines for us from NBCnews.com. We'll do this one more time, Simone, and sail off into the weekend.
Sounds good to me, my friend. Well, we'll start with an update on the fight against COVID. U.S. vaccination rates are slowing down, according to new CDC data. Daily average vaccinations dipping below 3 million for the first time in weeks. One possible reason, though, the ongoing halt in Johnson & Johnson vaccinations. Obviously, that changing a little bit today, but the data also showing more states have crossed the halfway point for residents with at least one shot. And an historic launch for Elon Musk's SpaceX today. It sent 4 astronauts to space using a recycled rocket and capsule for the first time. Now, this marks an important milestone in Musk's effort to make space travel more efficient and sustainable. The astronauts are expected to reach the International Space Station Saturday and will spend 6 months there. Well, heavy marijuana use among pregnant women could put babies at risk. Those babies are more likely to have health problems like premature birth and death within a year of birth. And that's according to researchers from the University of California, San Diego. The study analyzed data of nearly 5 million California women who gave birth between 2001 and 2012. An imprisoned Russian opposition leader, Alexei Navalny, ending his weeks-long hunger strike today after 24 days. The Putin critic began the strike to demand better medical care. The news comes days after protests across Russia calling for Navalny's release. Allison, that'll do it for me.
All right, Simone Boyce, the picture of sunshine today. Have an amazing weekend.
Thank you.
President Biden wrapping up a 2-day climate summit, looking ahead to a bright economic future.
Today's final session is not about the threat of climate change poses. It's about the opportunity that addressing climate change provides. It's an opportunity to create millions of good-paying jobs around the world.
NBCnews.com senior White House reporter Shannon Pettypiece joining me now. Shannon, President Biden actually complimenting Vladimir Putin at this summit. That is unusual. Tell us more.
Well, part of that had to do with these climate commitments that Putin made this week. One was to reduce emissions over the next 30 years to a lower level than a lot of his European counterparts have. And another was threatening to stiffen fines and penalties for industrial polluters. Here's a little bit more of what President Biden had to say.
I'm very heartened by President Putin's call yesterday for the world to collaborate and advance carbon dioxide removal. And the United States looks forward to working with Russia and other countries in that endeavor.
And so President Biden has always said there's going to be areas where the U.S. can work together with Russia and areas where we are adversaries. And at least this week, it appears that climate is one of those areas the two countries can work together on.
Shannon, President Biden delivers his joint address to Congress on Wednesday. He's expected to unveil the American Families Plan then. What do we know about what's in it, and what is the White House saying about that speech?
Well, this plan is expected to be the second phase, essentially, of his infrastructure plan. It's going to focus on childcare infrastructure as they define it. So things like universal pre-K, a child tax credit, paid leave for parents. But this joint address is going to look a lot different than in the past, as so much does in our lives. It's expected to be limited to only about 200 members of Congress and staff. Some Republicans have said they don't plan to attend. And here's what Press Secretary Jen Psaki said about what to expect.
Most of our staff, if not all of our staff, will be watching virtually, and there will not be the traditional box. We're determining how we can, of course, engage the public and ensure we highlight some of the incredible stories of people who have been helped by the president's policies and proposals, but it will not look like or feel like, in many ways, what past joint addresses have.
So just like we saw unconventional Democratic convention, we saw an unconventional inauguration, we will also be seeing a COVID-imposed unconventional joint address to Congress for the president's first remarks there.
All right, Shannon, we also know that South Carolina Senator Tim Scott will give the Republican rebuttal to that speech. Do we know anything about what he might say or how the White House feels about him as the Republicans' choice?
Well, it is a notable pick because as we've talked about the Republican Party trying to find itself and who it is between the firebrand Trump wing of the party and the more moderate, traditional conservative wing of the party, Tim Scott has found a way to sort of straddle those two worlds. He certainly has good credentials with former President Trump and Trump's allies. Yet at the same time, he's been working on a bipartisan effort with Karen Bass on police reform. And that's something we could anticipate hearing in those remarks. So a strategic choice by Republicans in their effort to show that there can be some bipartisanship from Republicans as well.
All right, Shannon Pettypiece, thanks so much. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
President Biden's ambitious push towards green energy could be a blow to the fossil fuel industry. The president says his infrastructure plan would create 250,000 jobs for fossil fuel workers, plugging oil wells across the U.S. NBC News correspondent Josh Letterman digs into that plan as part of NBC's Climate Challenge series.
The wheat fields glisten like gold on the windswept prairie of Montana. But a threat lurks beneath the beauty that stretches to the horizon.
Oh, yeah, you can smell that. Wow.
Yes, you can definitely smell that.
And with infrared cameras, you can see it. Dangerous gases spewing from abandoned oil and gas wells.
So that's methane.
It's methane gas, yeah.
So you've got gas 30 times more powerful than carbon dioxide at trapping heat in the atmosphere. And it's just coming out of this well, and you would have no idea that it's even there.
Right. You can't see it with the naked eye.
This is the wreckage left behind from a century and a half of drilling the earth for fuel, helping power American prosperity for generations. Now, as the Biden administration works to wean the U.S. from fossil fuels, it says it can create 250,000 jobs, not drilling new wells, but plugging old ones.
There are more than 2 million of these wells dotting the landscape across the country, some of them more than a century old. Many of them were built by companies that have long since gone bankrupt, leaving no one left to clean them up.
Curtis Schuck worked for decades in the oil and gas industry until he saw this farm, littered with unplugged wells from the 1920s.
I couldn't get this out of my mind. It was one of those things that once you see it, you sort of have this responsibility to do something about it.
Now he runs the Well Done Foundation, which plugs abandoned wells that threaten both the climate and drinking water. There could be 3.2 million of them. Across the country, the EPA says the unchecked gases are equivalent to burning 16 million barrels of crude oil every year.
It's about 300,000 tons of methane a year. That's the same amount of pollution as 1.5 million cars.
It's 55%, 81%.
Yeah, and then over limit. So
over limit, you maxed it out.
Yeah, so immediately.
Plugging a well costs $25,000 or more. President Biden's infrastructure plan calls for $16 billion to clean up wells and old mines.
We can put as many pipe fitters and miners and us to work capping those wells at the same price that they would charge to dig those wells.
As oil jobs dry up, plugging just 500,000 wells could create 120,000 jobs for people like Rob Braden, a senior at Montana Tech. His major, petroleum engineering.
Growing up in small town oil field country, a lot of the people support the industry, but they also really appreciate the land up here. I mean, that's what we have is the land.
Do you see a future for yourself in actually plugging abandoned wells like this?
If it could turn into a career, I would be very happy to be doing it. I love this kind of work.
It's not a silver bullet for climate change. There isn't one. But it could be a step toward matching skills with solutions, repairing damage from the past.
Is there an aspect of this that feels like penitence?
Well, it definitely feels good. This is just the cost of doing business going forward. I mean, I hate to tell you, but this is the new world in which we live in, and we've got to do better than we've ever done before.
Josh joins me live now. So, Josh, what's the fossil fuel industry saying about the president's plan? What do they like? What do they, I hate to use the word hate, but what do they dislike?
Well, to an extent, Allison, the fossil fuel industry sees that this train is leaving the station, with the global community and even major U.S. corporations now making clear they are taking climate change seriously. They like the fact that President Biden is putting serious money behind things like carbon capture technology, hydrogen power, other things that could ease this transition. They don't like the fact that at the end of that transition, as envisioned by President Biden's plan, is seizing the use of these dirtier fossil fuels as the U.S. increasingly uses renewable sources. And if you want a sign of how complicated this is, Allison, and the politics behind it, just this week, the United Mine Workers came out saying they would support President Biden's plan to transition away from fossil fuels as long as they got billions of dollars to make sure there were jobs available for those workers who are going to lose out. And then just a few days later, they walked that back, with a spokesman for the union appearing on the Mehdi Hassan show on Peacock saying it is still their goal to preserve as many coal jobs as possible, Allison.
It is a complex problem to solve. Josh, thanks so much for coming on today to talk to us about it. Fighting fire with fire. Scientists in California setting controlled burns in the Sierra Nevada mountains to stop wildfires. NBC News correspondent Jake Ward takes us inside their experiment.
High in the Sierra Nevada mountains, we watched this team set fire to the forest floor. As a news crew used to record-breaking fire seasons, it scared us to death.
So I look at this and I think this could get out of control at any moment. But you look at this and you know different than I.
That's right, yeah. It's virtually impossible for this to become a wildfire.
Rob York is a professor of forestry at UC Berkeley.
We're going to keep an eye out to make sure the fire is where we want it to be.
His office is this experimental forest in Northern California, where his team studies the benefits of fire.
It's not that we don't want fire, it's that we want the right type of fire.
You and I probably think of forests the same way, right? As a dark, shadowy environment. Well, it turns out this is actually what it's supposed to look like. 300 feet of visibility in every direction. I would get a sunburn here if I didn't wear a hat. That is the role of fire in making a healthy forest.
Here's a 1915 photograph from the Sierras. Here's the same place in 2002. Photos show that fire has always been part of California. But 20th century humans began fighting fires, and too well. This is a forest that hasn't burned in years. It's lush and green, but that makes it a ticking time bomb. Most of California's forests look like this. And drought and high temperatures in 2020 turned all this fuel into the worst fire season in modern history, burning a record 4 million acres and destroying thousands of homes and other buildings. The fires turned Bay Area skies an apocalyptic orange, sent plumes of smoke all the way across the continental U.S., and increased hospital admissions by as much as 10%. Experts say so-called prescribed burns, small intentional fires to thin out the forests, could prevent those mega fires. The governor's new budget sets aside $1 billion toward wildfire prevention and specifically calls for prescribed burns.
When people are driving down the road up here in the forest and they see the smoke, I want them to think, oh, cool, that's a prescribed fire.
Researchers here just finished burning this portion of the experimental forest.
This is actually the effects that we intended and we like to see.
How do I know the difference between this and the devastation of a wildfire? This looks damaged in a bad way.
If you just look up at the overstory trees, our big trees here, they're green and they're fine. We're not going to see a lot of damage in our larger overstory trees.
In fact, the soil here is better for new trees than it was before the burn.
Are you hopeful that people are beginning to learn we shouldn't just put out all fire every time?
I think we can get there with education and just with more people using fire and people getting used to it.
The question now, in a state of nearly 40 million people, can we afford to give the natural fire cycle the land it needs each year?
And Jake joins me now from Vacaville, California. Jake, you just showed us the pros of these control burn, but what are the cons? I mean, could these backfire? Forgive the choice of words.
Well, no, I mean, that is the right choice of words, Allison. I mean, one thing to consider, right, is that this is not, in fact, new science, right? Scientists are not inventing this idea. Lightning has struck California and set it on fire for millions of years. And native Californians, the tribes here, knew that setting intentional fires meant that once you burn this stuff off, what's left is a much more verdant, kind of ready soil. And you can already see, even in this landscape, I'm at the scene of the 4th largest wildfire in California history. Already here, you can see green popping back up. Great news. The problem, of course, is that native Californians, they would then move on from a burnt place. We build our homes in the path of the flames, right? I mean, this is the whole essence of California. Build where you want to, live the life you want to. So how do we reconcile this natural fire cycle that wants to burn and is good for the environment in doing so with our need to live all over this state, Allison?
Jake, I always look forward to reporting this story. Just the whole concept to me is so fascinating. Thank you so much for explaining it to us.
Thanks, Allison.
Migrants, never heard of them? They are the millions of people forced from their homes because of natural disasters. Those disasters, the product of climate change. As part of our Climate Challenge Week, MSNBC anchor Hallie Jackson visited some of those folks in Asheville, North Carolina.
The Booths love living in Asheville for its great art scene, its breweries, and its location. Very different than their last home on the coast of Georgia.
We started seeing the writing on the wall that it was time to probably move on.
That's because Melissa Booth, a scientist, had been noticing more extreme weather, stronger hurricanes, and sea level rise.
Was climate change the only reason that you decided to move?
I would say it was the biggest reason.
Why did you decide to move specifically here to Asheville?
There's plenty of fresh water here. There always will be. There's also no hurricanes, no big tornadoes, no violent weather patterns.
Asheville is not immune to climate change, of course, but experts say partly because of where it sits, high up here in the Blue Ridge Mountains, it doesn't have as many weather extremes.
And Asheville is not alone. It's estimated nearly 5 million people have been displaced from their homes in the past 5 years because of natural disasters triggered by the climate crisis. So whether people are forced to leave or choose to, where might they go? Climate researchers say the answer is in and up to havens away from the coasts and the heat. Think Duluth, Toledo, Madison, or Buffalo.
The cities prepared to onboard climigrants, as we call them, climate migrants. They need a variety of different investments in affordable housing and transportation, in economic development.
And that's another challenge. More people will mean more infrastructure needs. And for the Asheville mayor, more of a reckoning over climate gentrification.
Are we preserving this community for the people that live here? Are we creating a community for the people that are going to move here? We need to make sure that everyone has an opportunity as the city grows and changes.
A changing climate, changing communities. Hallie Jackson, NBC News, Asheville, North Carolina.
The Jenner clan wants into the governor's mansion. Caitlyn Jenner announcing her bid to be California's next governor. The reality TV star and transgender activist hoping to replace Democrat Gavin Newsom in a recall election. NBC News correspondent Aaron McLaughlin joining me now. So, Aaron, I have to ask, what is it about today? Why is Jenner launching this campaign now?
Well, she says she's filing her paperwork today, Allison. A formal announcement is expected in the coming weeks. Now we have this lengthy Twitter announcement in which she says that she's launching a campaign powered by everyday Californians, casting herself as a, quote, compassionate disruptor, saying, quote, I am a proven winner and the only outsider who can put an end to Gavin Newsom's disastrous time as governor. In this statement, really taking aim at Governor Newsom's record during the pandemic, the way he has handled shutting down the state, as well as the way he has handled the schooling. Lots of kids have been out of school for about a year or so now. So really taking aim at that pandemic record. Whether it'll be successful or not remains to be seen. Gavin Newsom was out and about today and asked about her announcement, and he said that he's focused on rebuilding and restarting the Californian economy. Allison.
So, Aaron, for those of us who are outside of California, what is the latest on the recall there?
Well, the recall at this point seems inevitable. More than 2 million signatures, according to those backing this recall, have been collected throughout the state of California. They're in the process, county by county, of verifying those signatures. Once that happens, and that seems to be certain, even Governor Newsom acknowledges as much, there will be a recall in the fall in which voters will have essentially two options. They'll be asked whether or not they want to recall Governor Newsom, and if they do, the second question will focus on a replacement candidate. Jenner will be one of many candidates likely to be on that ballot.
Aaron, Jenner is not the first celebrity to run in a California recall election. That's how Arnold Schwarzenegger became governor. How are their situations similar, if at all?
Yeah, well, they're both seen as political novices, both celebrities, both Republicans trying to make it in a state that's firmly in the hands of a Democrat. But when Schwarzenegger he ran back in 2003. It was a very different political time back then. He won with 48.5% of the vote. Jenner faces very much an uphill battle, especially when you consider the current backing for Governor Newsom. His numbers really haven't changed that much. Yes, he's come under criticism, under fire for his handling of the pandemic. But according to the most recent survey, some 40% responded saying that they would back the recall. When you compare that to his numbers in the 2018 election, 38% of the electorate voted against him. So it really hasn't moved all that much. The momentum still seems to be very much in his favor at this point. Allison.
All right. Aaron, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Time is running out to find an Indonesian Navy submarine lost in the Bali Sea. 53 crew members on board have less than a day of oxygen left. NBC News senior international correspondent Keir Simmons has the latest on the search.
Hey, Alison, imagine being the family of one of the sailors on board this missing submarine. An official in Indonesia saying that search and rescue vessels are still arriving in the region. Meanwhile, the Indonesian military saying it is determined to, quote, bring our brothers back.
A search and rescue operation that now includes the US Navy has found an object underwater. Could it be the missing Indonesian submarine? The Indonesian Navy says an unidentified object with a high magnetic force has been found at a depth of between 164 and 328 feet. One sailor was apparently married just 2 months ago. His worried bride posting on TikTok pictures of them together, with the words, "Hurry home, your wife is waiting." But hope is fading of finding the 53 sailors on board alive. Overnight, the US Navy saying, "We are deeply saddened by the news of Indonesia's lost submarine, and our thoughts are with the Indonesian sailors and their families. We are sending airborne assets to assist the search." Rescuers have been told the submarine's oxygen may run out tomorrow. Experts say the sailors need a miracle.
There's 53 people on board a submarine designed for 34. So that means that whatever oxygen supplies they have, and they may have embarked more before they left, will be used more quickly.
The Indonesian Navy submarine vanished off the coast of Bali early Wednesday during a training exercise. The German-made diesel-powered vessel was built in 1977 and joined the Indonesian fleet in 1981. A refit was completed in 2012. Warships and helicopters and 400 people helping search this morning. Close to where the submarine disappeared, an oil spill may be a sign of mechanical issues or a signal from the missing sailors, as desperate families wait for news.
And the Indonesian Navy saying there may have been an electrical failure on board the submarine during a dive, causing it to lose control. If that had happened, it would not have been able to take emergency measures and to resurface. I do think there are going to be many questions when this is all over. But first, of course, this search and rescue mission, while there is still a glimmer of hope.
Do you hug or kiss on a first date anymore? Meet up with a stranger for a drink in a bar? What does love look like after lockdown? And how has dating changed during the pandemic? Here's NBC News producer Julie Sirkin.
What do you think the pandemic means for Gen Z, millennial generation, in terms of dating? Do you think that it changes the future landscape of relationships?
Going up to talk to somebody in a bar is now like incredibly strange, right? Like no one does that. So I think it's going to continue that shift towards dating apps and towards finding people that you know are interested.
With more shots in arms, singles are looking for their shot at love. After a year in lockdown, how has the pandemic changed the way people date and what they're searching for in a match?
I think the pandemic has pushed people to really think about commitment in a meaningful way because we have become so much more isolated.
Experts say things are shifting for the swipe right generation, the pandemic transforming the dating landscape and driving Gen Z singles to crave commitment, with 52% saying a serious relationship is what they're looking for next.
I think that this generation has gone through a lot of turbulent times really quickly, and having a really committed partner offers a lot of stability.
Logan Urey, a relationship scientist at Hinge, said with all that time spent alone, the pandemic made people question what's really important to them.
Dating and relationships in a more intentional, serious, respectful way has risen to the top of people's priority list. And we're definitely going to see people who are coming out of this looking to commit, looking to build something with someone.
We spoke to dozens of men and women navigating life in the pandemic. Some say it hasn't been easy looking for love after the lockdown. My priorities for making a match are nothing even close to the same as they were before the pandemic. I met someone early on and I knew it wouldn't work out, but I clung on since it's hard to meet people. I don't go on any dating apps, and meeting someone in the real world in a more natural or spontaneous way seems like a hurdle while trying to remain safe. I lost my job and I'm in my mid-30s. I'm definitely looking for a serious relationship because I lost an entire year of dating.
I think in my entire history of online dating prior to the pandemic, I had one phone call before I met somebody. And this past year, probably 7 or 8 times where somebody wanted to talk on the phone beforehand. I've done maybe a handful of Skype dates because I find them to be incredibly awkward almost universally. It's like hanging out with my coworkers. It's like being at work, but all the worst parts of it where you're sitting there being like, I don't have anything to talk about.
Singles have been chatting online and in outdoor spaces like this, but now that things are opening back up, they're gearing up for their first official dates.
Most of my friends and I, we were in a pod together, so like even bringing him into that pod, it was like a question of like, how can we make sure that this is safe?
COVID is clearly still a factor. However, singles are advertising their vaccination cards online, eager to get back out there.
Now it's a totally different conversation. It's like, oh, are you vaccinated? Oh, you only got your first shot? Well, like, I'm not seeing anyone until I get my second shot. So it's like dating online and apps is already weird, but now add all these things into the mix.
One woman telling us pandemic dating moved things along rather quickly, saying, quote, he had a toothbrush at my place since the night of our first date.
we're really expecting this summer to be a relationship boom because you combine two things. You combine that intentionality of people doing that inner work, and then you combine that with the motivation of, I've been alone for a long time and I'm ready to find someone. And so we really think people will be partnering up and getting into great relationships.
This time period has changed how we all see ourselves and our social interactions. I don't see that changing at all. And I do think that people are going to be much more intentional because the pandemic isn't over, it's still here. And so a lot of the things that people are worried about are going to keep happening even as we all get vaccinated.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.